The first time I heard the noise, I was half asleep. You know that place between dreaming and waking, where everything feels slightly distorted? That's where I was. I had just moved into the apartment a week earlier, still surrounded by half unpacked boxes and the kind of silence you get when a place hasn't quite become yours yet. It was late, maybe close to 1 a.m., and I had dozed off on the couch with the TV still playing low. Then I heard it. A faint sound, almost like scratching, light, irregular, and close. Too close. At first I thought it was coming from the window, maybe a branch outside, tapping against the glass. I muted the TV and sat up, holding my breath. The sound stopped. I waited, staring at the window, at the shadows stretching across the floor, trying to convince myself it was nothing. After a few moments of stillness, I shrugged it off and went to bed. But the noise came back the next night. This time, it was louder. It sounded like it was coming from inside the walls, right behind the plaster. A slow, rhythmic movement, not constant, but definitely deliberate. I lay in bed, heart beating fast, eyes wide open in the dark. I listened as it moved from one side of the room to the other, following the base of the wall. I imagined rats, or maybe squirrels in the crawl space, even though I knew there shouldn't be any access for something that big. Still, it was Brooklyn, old buildings, drafty walls. It made sense, sort of. The next morning, I walked around the apartment tapping on the walls, trying to find hollow spaces or holes where an animal could have squeezed in. I didn't find anything. No droppings, no chewed wires, no signs of nesting. I even knocked on my neighbor's door to ask if they'd heard anything strange. But they just gave me that classic New York look, the one that says, "Mind your business," without saying a word. That third night, the sound returned with a different tone. Less like scratching, more like dragging. Something scraping slowly along the inside of the drywall, as if it had claws or fingers. I pressed my ear to the wall. There was a soft vibration beneath the surface, as though something alive was moving just a few inches from my face. I flinched and pulled back, heart thudding in my chest. There was nothing I could see. No way to confirm what I'd just felt, but I knew something was there. It became a nightly ritual, lying in bed, holding my breath, listening to the sounds that didn't belong. The worst part was how unpredictable it was. Some nights there would be nothing, and I'd almost convince myself I imagined it. Other nights, the noise would start the moment I turned off the lights. Tapping, scraping, the faintest whisper of movement behind my bed, behind the kitchen wall, sometimes even above me, like something crawling through the ceiling. I began to dread nighttime. Sleep became a battle. Every creak, every groan of the old building felt amplified, sinister. I tried playing music to drown it out, but that only seemed to make it worse. Like whatever it was didn't want to be ignored. The sound would rise to meet the volume, matching it, mimicking it, sometimes even answering it. I bought traps, thinking maybe it was just a raccoon or something equally wild and urban, but nothing ever turned up. Not in the traps, not in the hallway, not in the basement. I forced myself to check one afternoon with a flashlight and shaking hands. The super said he hadn't seen any signs of infestation. He even laughed when I mentioned scratching in the walls, told me the pipes make all kinds of noises in these old buildings. But I've heard pipes before. This wasn't pipes. Pipes don't breathe. After a week of hearing the strange noises inside the walls, I started to rationalize what was happening. That's what most people do, right? You hear something strange. Your first instinct isn't ghosts or monsters. It's pests. It's something manageable, something explainable. I told myself it was probably mice, maybe rats. Maybe a raccoon had gotten into the attic and found a way into the walls. New York apartments are notorious for that kind of thing. Old buildings, crumbling brick, ancient wiring. It's almost expected. I went out and bought a pack of mousetraps and some of those electronic devices that supposedly repel rodents with high-frequency sound. I lined them along the baseboards, near the areas where I heard the noises most often. My bedroom wall, the corner of the kitchen, and the narrow hallway leading to the bathroom. I felt a little more in control just doing that, like I was solving a problem, taking action. But the sounds didn't stop. In fact, they got weirder. Instead of random scurrying, I began to notice patterns. The movement wasn't fast or erratic like mice running. It was slow, methodical, like something creeping. I paid attention to the time, always between 1 and 3 a.m., always when the apartment was dead quiet, always when I was alone and trying to sleep. The sounds would start with a gentle tapping, like fingernails on wood. Then there'd be a pause, sometimes long enough for me to think it had stopped. Then a sudden sharp knock, not from the other side of a door, from the wall, from inside the wall. I remember sitting up one night, switching on the light and just staring at the plaster. I don't know what I expected to see. A crack, a hole, maybe a rat tail slipping through. But there was nothing. The wall looked as blank and harmless as it always had, but the sound kept going, right behind it, as if the drywall was a thin veil hiding something that didn't belong in this world. I called an exterminator. He came during the day, of course, when the apartment was quiet, when the walls weren't making their strange music. He did a full inspection, checked for signs of infestation, chewed wires, droppings, entry points. He found nothing, not a single clue. He even complimented how clean my apartment was, said if there were pests, they were hiding really well. I tried convincing myself that maybe it was just the building shifting, or plumbing, or even wind, but none of those explanations felt right. I grew up in a house with old pipes. I knew the difference between a creaky building and something alive, and the sounds weren't limited to one spot. Sometimes they came from the wall near my bed. Other times, I'd be in the kitchen and hear something behind the cabinets. A low thud, a scratch, like nails on drywall, slow and steady. One night, I stood in the hallway with all the lights off, trying to isolate the sound. It was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Then, right next to my ear, from inside the wall, came a long, dragging scrape, like something was being pulled. It moved past me, traveling the length of the wall behind the hallway mirror. I didn't move. I just stood there, paralyzed. Whatever it wasn't rushing. It wasn't trying to escape. It was moving at its own pace, like it belonged there, like it was watching me. I stopped using the traps after that. What was the point? Whatever was behind those walls wasn't some ordinary rodent. There was an intelligence to it, a presence I couldn't explain. I didn't tell anyone anymore. Not my friends, not my co-workers. I could see it in their eyes when I brought it up. That mix of disbelief and quiet concern. The kind people reserve for someone they think is losing touch with reality, so I stopped talking about it, but the noises didn't stop. It was sometime after 2 a.m. when I finally pressed my ear to the wall. I'd been lying in bed for over an hour, staring at the ceiling, listening to the now familiar sounds that had become part of my nightly routine. Tap, scratch, drag. The sequence had started again, but this time it felt different, closer, more deliberate. I sat up slowly, trying not to make a sound, and tiptoed toward the wall near my bedroom door. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure whatever was inside the wall could hear it. I didn't know what I was expecting, maybe to confirm that it was just some creature, something natural, explainable. But as soon as I leaned in, pressing my left ear flat against the cold plaster, I realized this wasn't like the other nights. There wasn't any scratching or dragging. There was something else, something quiet but undeniable, breathing. It was faint, but once I tuned into it, I couldn't unhear it. A slow, raspy inhale, followed by a shaky, wheezing exhale. Like someone sick, struggling to breathe. It wasn't rhythmic like a machine or a pipe. It sounded human, or something trying to be human. I froze, holding my breath to make sure it wasn't my own I was hearing. But no, this was separate from me. Just behind the thin barrier of drywall, something was there, and it was alive, I backed away from the wall, stumbling slightly, nearly knocking over the chair beside my bed. I flicked the light on, expecting something, anything to happen. But the room was empty, the wall unchanged, blank and silent once again. The next day, I barely functioned. I went to work with bags under my eyes, barely able to focus. My co-workers noticed. One of them asked if I was okay, and I gave some excuse about not sleeping well, which wasn't a lie. I wanted to tell them the truth, that I'd heard breathing inside my walls, but I knew how it would sound. I knew the look I'd get, so I stayed quiet. That night, the fear came faster. As soon as the sun went down, I felt the unease creeping in. I kept all the lights on, every room bright as if light alone could keep it at bay. I turned the TV up louder than usual, hoping the noise would drown it out, hoping I wouldn't hear it again. But around 1:45 a.m., everything went still. The air felt heavy, like the silence itself was pressing against me. I turned the TV off, and that's when I heard it again. This time, unmistakably, a whisper. It was so soft, I almost thought I imagined it. A few syllables, muffled by the wall, like someone murmuring from another room. I leaned in again, cautious, slowly, like approaching a sleeping animal. My ear touched the wall, and there it was, not just breathing, words. A whisper that seemed to travel from the far end of the room to right where I stood. "You hear me now." My skin turned cold. I jerked away from the wall like it had burned me. The voice was hoarse and low, like someone speaking through clenched teeth or from very far away. I stood there, frozen, staring at the wall as though it might open up and reveal whoever or whatever had spoken. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in my living room, lights on, wrapped in a blanket like it could protect me. The voice didn't come again that night. Neither did the tapping or the scratching. But the silence was worse somehow, as if it was waiting for me to listen again, as if now that I'd acknowledged it, it had no reason to hide. After hearing the whisper through the wall, things started to change in the apartment. It wasn't just the noises anymore. It was everything. Little things at first. The kind of things you'd brush off if they happened once or twice. But they kept happening, and each time they felt slightly more targeted, slightly more personal. The air in the apartment felt thicker, like it was harder to breathe, like something invisible was pressing down on me. It wasn't just a feeling of being watched. It was the overwhelming certainty that I was no longer alone, even when I was. The first time something moved on its own, I was in the kitchen. I had placed my keys on the counter like I always did. I walked to the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, turned around, and they were gone. I checked the floor, under the counter, even in the sink, thinking maybe I'd knocked them over without noticing. Nothing. I searched the entire apartment, becoming more frantic by the second, until I found the keys neatly placed on the windowsill in the bedroom. I hadn't even gone into the bedroom yet that morning. That was just the beginning. Lights started flickering without cause. Not just flickering, but dimming slowly, unnaturally, like something was pulling the electricity out of the air. Bulbs that had worked perfectly fine would suddenly buzz, then burn out within days. I replaced them, again and again, but the flickering always returned, like a warning. Sometimes, it would happen right as I entered a room, as if the thing in the walls wanted me to know it was paying attention. Then came the smell. It was subtle at first, a faint, musty odor near the hallway. I thought maybe there was mold, or something rotting in the walls. I sprayed air freshener, scrubbed the floors, even opened the windows despite the winter chill. But it kept getting worse. It smelled like wet earth, like old wood and damp clothing that had been buried and forgotten. Some nights, it was so strong it made me gag. The stench always came from the same places. The kitchen wall, the bedroom corner, the space behind the mirror in the hallway. I began to notice things weren't just moving. They were being rearranged. I'd come home to find my closet open, clothes pulled slightly off the hangers, books on my shelves turned backward, pages dog-eared that I hadn't touched in months. My toothbrush would be wet in the morning, even when I was sure I hadn't used it yet. It wasn't like someone had broken in. Nothing was stolen. Nothing valuable touched. It felt more like a game. Like something was testing how far it could go before I broke. Sleep became nearly impossible. I'd wake up at exactly 3:13 a.m. almost every night, drenched in sweat, heart racing, no dream to explain it. I started leaving lights on in the hallway, in the bathroom, even in the closet. I tried sleeping with noise, TV, fan, anything. But somehow, even through all the noise, I could still hear it. The faint tapping, the dragging, and sometimes, very clearly, the whispering voice humming an old lullaby I couldn't quite place. One night, I found all the cabinet doors in the kitchen, open, every single one. I had closed them myself, I knew that for certain. And inside, everything was perfectly arranged. Too perfect. Every plate centered, every can label facing outward, like someone, or something, had taken the time to organize my life while I slept. I didn't feel comforted. I felt invaded. And underneath it all was that smell, the damp, foul odor that clung to the walls like a sickness. I tried talking to the landlord again, but he dismissed it. Said maybe I was overworked, maybe I needed a break from the city. I couldn't blame him. I sounded unhinged, but deep down, I knew. The noises were never the whole story. The whispers were just the beginning. Whatever was in the walls was getting stronger, bolder, closer. I started recording everything. I set up my phone with a voice memo app each night, placing it near the wall where the noises were strongest. I needed proof, not just for others, but for myself. There were too many moments where I questioned my sanity, where I wondered if stress or lack of sleep was twisting my perception. I thought if I had the recordings, I could listen in the morning and know what was real. The first few nights captured only faint sounds, soft scratches, occasional thumps, nothing substantial, nothing I could show anyone that would make them understand what I was experiencing. Then one morning, I played back the previous night's audio and heard something that made my skin crawl. Around 3:12 a.m., there was a long stretch of silence, then a noise, like a whisper, right into the microphone. It wasn't clear or distinct, more like a breath laced with the hint of a word. I replayed it over and over, adjusting the volume, trying to isolate it, but no matter how many times I listened, I couldn't make out what it was saying. All I knew was that the phone had been sitting in an empty room, untouched, and something had spoken near it, encouraged and terrified at the same time. I bought a cheap baby monitor and set it up in the bedroom. I thought maybe I'd catch something in real time, something more immediate. The first few nights were quiet, but eventually the monitor picked up strange interference, static patterns that would come and go, then suddenly spike, followed by moments of complete silence, as if the sound was being swallowed. On the fifth night, I woke up to the monitor buzzing. Through the static, a voice emerged. Slow, raspy. This time I understood the words. Let me out. The voice didn't sound panicked. It sounded patient. It sounded like it had been waiting a long time. I turned the monitor off and unplugged it. I told myself I'd hallucinated the whole thing, that sleep deprivation had finally broken me. But the recordings, the monitor, the noises, they were real. Too many things were happening to dismiss. And now it wasn't just sounds. There were shadows, brief and darting, seen from the corner of my eye. Once, I saw something in the bathroom mirror, something behind me that wasn't there when I turned around. A shape, dark, featureless, gone in a blink. But I know what I saw. The physical effects were beginning to take a toll. I was tired all the time. My body ached. My eyes constantly burned from lack of sleep. My hands trembled during the day, and I found it hard to focus on anything for more than a few minutes. Friends stopped texting. Work became a blur. My world shrank to the size of my apartment, and inside it, the walls seemed to be breathing. One night, I woke up to find my closet door wide open and all my clothes pulled out, piled in the center of the room. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was torn. It was as if someone, or something, had gone through everything piece by piece, laid it out, and then left. I stood there in the dim light, heart pounding, and looked around my room, half expecting to see someone still there. But it was empty, as always. And yet, it never felt empty. I stopped inviting people over. I stopped leaving the apartment unless absolutely necessary. I felt safer inside, but also more exposed, like whatever was in the walls was growing confident in my isolation. It didn't have to hide anymore. I started to hear my name spoken softly from behind the plaster. I would walk into a room and feel cold air brush past me, even with no windows open. The apartment wasn't just haunted. It was alive, and it was watching me unravel. It was around this time I started peeling back the layers of the wall. I couldn't help it anymore. Every night brought a new noise, a new whisper, a new feeling that something was just inches away, pressing through the drywall, trying to get through. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't focus. I would sit up at night staring at the same patch of wall in my bedroom, where the dragging sound always seemed to begin. I needed to see what was inside. I needed to know if this was something that could be fixed, or something that had already claimed this space long before I arrived. I started with a small section behind the bed, clearing furniture out of the way and using a flashlight to trace for any signs, cracks, bulges, discoloration. I noticed the paint was slightly darker there, not from dampness, but from age, as if someone had patched it up long ago. I took a screwdriver and began chipping away slowly. The plaster was thin, more brittle than I expected, and it came off in flakes. Underneath it was an older layer of wood, lath boards, dry and splintered, part of the original structure. It took hours, and by the time I'd opened a 2-foot section, my arms were shaking from exhaustion and fear. Behind the lath was nothing at first, just darkness, a hollow pocket between the walls. I stuck the flashlight inside and peered in. Dust particles floated through the beam like snow. I couldn't see the back wall, only more wood beams and insulation, tangled and grey like cobwebs. But the smell hit me almost immediately. That same damp, decaying scent that I had become used to. Only now it was stronger, more pungent, like something old had been disturbed after decades of silence. I didn't find bones or a nest or wires. What I found was worse in its ambiguity. Deep in the cavity, there were old objects, carefully placed, almost arranged. A child's shoe, caked in dust. A small glass bottle filled with something black and tar-like. A piece of what looked like hair tied with twine. And a photo, folded, yellowed, edges crumbling. It was a picture of a woman standing in what looked like the same apartment, only decades earlier. Her face had been scratched out, not by time or damage, intentionally, as if someone had taken a knife to it. I pulled back from the hole, heart racing, and sat on the floor for a long time, unable to make sense of what I had seen. None of it explained the whispers, or the shadows, or the voice that called my name. But it proved something was wrong with this place, something that wasn't just in my mind. I took the objects and placed them in a box, unsure what to do next. I thought about calling someone, an expert, a priest, anyone. But I knew how it would sound. I couldn't even explain it to myself, without feeling like I was on the edge of something dangerous. Over the next few days, the apartment changed again. The noises stopped entirely, replaced by a silence that felt manufactured, too heavy. The cold spots turned into entire rooms that seemed 10 degrees colder than the rest. The photo I had found started to show up in places I hadn't left it, in the bathroom sink under my pillow, once tucked inside the refrigerator door. No one had been inside. No one could have moved it. I started locking all my doors, not out of fear of intruders, but out of fear of what might already be inside. One night, I woke up with my bedroom door slowly creaking open, even though I had locked it. I sat upright, staring into the darkness beyond the doorframe. Nothing moved. Nothing entered. But I could hear it, the breathing, closer than ever. Not from the walls anymore. From the room itself. From behind the closet. From under the bed. From everywhere all at once.